When you're all done with putting together your quilt top, it's time to think about the quilting designs. And the last time I shared a video about my long arm, I had questions about setting up a pantograph. So when I loaded my most recent quilt, I turned on the camera, and today you get a behind the scenes look at all things pantographs. The first question you may have is, what is a pantograph? Well, it is a line drawing of the quilting design that you follow with a laser on your machine. So let's get to the long arm. I have the quilt top loaded and I am ready to set up my pantograph. This is one of my favorites. I've used it for almost my entire quilting career. It was one of the first patterns I got from Linda's Electric Quilters. She had a library of pantographs, and I also like Urban Elementz for paper pantographs. These are designs printed on a long roll of paper, and I simply line it up on the back table of my machine, and then I can use a laser to follow the lines, and I will show you that whole process. So there are guidelines on the table, and I'm just sliding it down to the end. And I use dry erase markers on this plastic shield that covers my pantograph, and so I need to erase the markings from the last quilt I did, and then I can get things lined up for this quilt. Okay, so I am guiding the machine to its starting position, and I'm looking at the needle on my machine, and that is a pretty good spot to start on the pattern. So I will just mark a line, and it doesn't have to be exact, things move around, and I put an arrow showing my starting point. That's what I'm using the dry erase marker for. And then I slide the machine all the way over to the other end of my fabric, and again I am going to mark a line where I will be ending my pattern. And then we need to get the actual quilt in place. So I've already basted my layers together, and I need to position my needle. I'm going to put the needle down. I'm trying to think. I actually need it on this end because I have to be able to reach my handles, my rollers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the quilt so that the laser is on the top edge of the pattern. So we'll unclip the quilt for a minute. And let me get oriented. I can see, let's see, I can see the laser light on the pattern, and I just make sure that dot is right on the top edge of my design. Okay, so now we are set, and this particular pattern is pretty narrow, so it's good for smaller quilts. I will get everything clipped back in place. Always remember to raise your needle before you move the machine. And then we are ready to stitch our first row. Okay, I am going to double check that the top of my pattern is about where I wanted it to be, at the top of the block design. Okay, and then I am starting off the edge of my quilt. So I have one hand holding the tail of my thread, the other hand is working the buttons on my machine. So I can take a stitch, draw up my thread, get started, and now I am just going to guide my laser along the printed line. Okay, we've reached the end of our row, so I'm going to go around to the other side of the machine to break my thread, and then we need to do a little bit of setup for the next row. Okay, now I need to look at actually I'm getting my laser right on a dot that's printed on the pattern. It says slide pattern here to offset the next row, but this dot says top of next row. So I'm underneath the stitching where I just finished, and I've lined up my laser with the pattern dot for positioning, and I'm going to lower my needle, and then I can unclamp and advance my quilt. So this pattern is, was one of the very earliest patterns from 2002, and so it uses this. It's just the single row of flowers, and it uses these offset dots. Other patterns I have are actually two printed rows, and that way you can line it up a little bit easier. Here's another pantograph that already is drawn with two rows nested together. So I would just position my needle at the bottom of the pattern where my stitches are in this position, and then I would advance the quilt so that the laser ends up at the exact same position in the top row so that I'm ready to quilt another row underneath. I'm going to roll my quilt up until it hits the top of pattern dot, and then I can tighten my quilt up, and I'm going to raise my needle, make sure I haven't actually taken a stitch, loosen all my threads. I'm going to come back to my pattern dot and leave that needle down, and then go to the back of the machine and actually slide the pattern. So I'm looking at this pattern dot here. grabbing the pattern, and I am sliding my pattern until it hits the other dot. Here is the pantograph on the back of the quilt machine. As I was saying, I've got my dry erase markers. I'm going to start on this solid line and just the laser follows that up and over and trace all the flowers along the edge. The machine's at the end of the row because I was just lining up. Here are the dots I was talking about on the pattern, and I have marked the ending line, which is right in line with the edge of the fabric. So I've got my laser dot and it's gonna guide the needle position. So that is how I work with pantographs as a hand-guided quilter. If you're looking for some free motion quilting designs, check out this video next. I'm sharing some of my all-time favorites.